Welcome to Recovery Corner, where the many pathways of recovery intersect. This is a space where you will hear personal stories of triumph in recovery, gain insights into various recovery-oriented systems, and learn how leaders across the country are building recovery-ready communities. The Recovery Corner podcast does not provide clinical advice. Hello, friends, and welcome to today's episode of Recovery Corner. My name is Meg. I'm the social media coordinator here at Young People in Recovery. And I'm also a person in long-term recovery. I last month hit 2.5 years, so pretty excited to be here having this conversation today with Alison Jones Webb, the author of Recovery Allies, How to Support Addiction Recovery and Build Recovery-Friendly Communities. Alison, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So as you noted, I wrote a book, Recovery Allies, and I am myself a recovery ally. I'm also an affected family member. I'll spend a little bit more time talking about YPR's role in my journey as an ally, because YPR was actually very important to me early on. So I spent my career in Maine, and that's where most of my advocacy and ally work happened. And about 2 years ago, I moved down to Charlottesville, Virginia, where I continue to kind of be engaged as an ally. So that's where I am right now.
Perfect. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about what recovery allies are and what their role is in supporting their loved ones and having a positive impact on the recovery community as a whole. So to get started, would you just please share a little bit about your journey and how you became an ally to the recovery movement?
Absolutely. So that's where YPR comes in. So I am an affected family member, and in my family, we really don't talk very much about substance use disorder or substance use. And so my experience growing up with substance use disorder was really just silence and lots of questions, and not really understanding what was going on in the background in my family. And about 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, I started doing work professionally in public health to increase access to treatment for individuals with opioid use disorder. And that sort of morphed into a job where we were trying to figure out how to increase access to treatment for young people in Maine, because there was really nothing at the time. And one of the things that we decided to do was to do some focus groups with parents, do some focus groups with young people, do some focus groups with teachers and so forth, anyone who sort of interfaced with young people, to understand why they weren't seeking treatment, just understand more about what their needs were. And so in order to do that, I felt it was important to train people who were from the young person population to do the focus groups, because there's evidence that if a focus group is facilitated by somebody from the population, the results are much more credible and the conversations are much richer. So I got connected with 4 young people in recovery who also at that time were forming the Maine State chapter, the first Maine chapter of Young People in Recovery, of YPR. And so I did train them, and we did do focus groups, and we learned a whole lot. And in that process, we became friends. And I became pretty passionate about YPR as an organization and YPR as an advocacy organization. There was just a lot of potential there. And I think because of my friendship with these people, I learned a lot. I just learned a lot, and I learned how to think about what was going on in my family because of the way that they were able to talk about their own recovery, their own family struggles. And so that's sort of the beginning of my journey, I guess, as an ally. And pretty much since then, because I did work in public health and because I am so passionate about advocacy, my allyship sort of tracked the issues as they came along. So finding recovery support services, addressing harm reduction, addressing medication-assisted treatment, all of those things that are issues for the recovery community are things that I got engaged in from an advocacy point of view.
Wow, that's great. Something that really stood out to me about your story is your own experience as a family member and the silence that surrounded substance use in your family. I think that's an experience that a lot of people can relate to. And I know it comes up in the book a lot that stigma is powerful and silence is part of that stigma.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that family members can do once they understand that they're actually part of the problem of stigma. They may be part of other problems, but they're certainly part of the problem of stigma when they don't speak up. One of the things that they can do is get educated about why stigma is so pervasive, why it's so important to speak out, why it's so important for people not to be ashamed about seeking treatment, for example. And then just, having humane relationships that don't have this thing that's hidden that, it's like nobody's talking about it, but there it is, as we say, the elephant in the room. And so I think one of the major roles that family members can play as allies, once they understand, takes a while to understand all this stuff, is definitely to reach out in the community, to engage other people, to talk to them about stigma, to tell their own stories, about going from a place of not understanding to a place of acceptance and empathy. That is the journey of an ally, really. So allies, most allies, I don't think, are born that way. We all learn and we all grow. And so affected family members can help in the broader community with understanding the importance of learning and growing, and stigmatizing language is part of it, but that's really it's a small part of the bigger piece of being empathetic and caring.
Oh, yes, definitely. So, real quick, can we back up a little bit? Can you define what exactly an ally is?
Yeah, so such a great question. If you took a look at my book, but also anybody who knows me knows I am like all about research and all about evidence. And there's very little research on allies. And so there's not like this standard definition that we can use. And so there are two definitions that I like. One of them is it's from a guy who is the program coordinator for Ramsden Recovery at Virginia Commonwealth University. His name's Tom Bannard, and he talks about recovery allies as individuals who are willing to learn and grow, and be empathetic, learn and grow about addiction, and to just reach out and be caring. And so those are the characteristics of the individual, which is what I was talking about earlier. Like it's not just about language and addressing stigma. It's about being caring individuals. But then so that talks about like the qualities of the individual. And then I like to think about allies as people who use their own skills, they use their own resources, they use their own networks to support individuals in recovery, and then also to support the entire recovery community. So that varies from one person to the other as to what they're able to do, what they want to do, what they like to do, and how they can engage. Is that helpful?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
What stood out to me about that answer is that allies can fill a lot of forms. They all look different. There's no one journey. Just like every person in recovery or every person who's experiencing active addiction has a story, so does every ally, and how they became involved with recovery, whether they've just been really passionate, or if they have a family member who's in recovery, or if they lost a family member to the disease. Everybody has that story, and those stories are also powerful. And they also show that the people who are experiencing addiction or who are in recovery have people who love them. They're not a closed off community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one of the things that I've learned in my own sort of advocacy recovery ally journey is that um, recovery isn't the same when you're 20, for example, as when you're 50. It's also not the same when you're 2 months into your recovery journey and when you're 20 years into it. And so the role of the ally depends on the circumstances also. And my, what I've learned is that supporting people that I've known for a long time in recovery, those YPR guys from 10 years ago, where they are now is such a different place. And yet still we're in touch, we support each other, we care about each other. Their recovery journey looks really different now. And so for allies to just understand that it's not a one and done, it's ongoing, and it really is a relationship that you have with people who are in recovery or with the broader recovery community, if you want to think about it in a bigger way.
Mm-hmm. And I think the best way that allies can support their loved ones and the recovery community, you mentioned this several times in the book, but asking people what they need, how you can support, and being able to follow through on that. Because yes, you can ask and listen, but if you're not willing to change anything, like what good does that do? But being willing, able, and enthusiastic about taking action can really make a world of difference.
So I talked to one woman who, I mean, she said something that was just like an arrow to my heart. And so we were just talking about, oh, what can allies do? And, she's a woman in maybe 5 years in recovery. And she said, allies can be willing to change, which is what you just alluded to, right? And so it's like, why? So she was speaking for herself. Why do we have to do all of the change? Why do we have to do it all? You can open your hearts and think about a different way to think about us and think about the world generally. And I think that is just so incredibly important because it opens up a world of possibilities for how to be an ally. And then the next step, right, is what are you going to do about it? And, I really like to encourage people to think about where they are in their own lives and where they have influence in their own lives and how they can apply that to the recovery community.
Yeah, there are so many ways people come into contact with the recovery community and have connections to their community at large. Like if somebody is on their city council, they've got a lot of power. But even if somebody's just a yoga teacher, they have the power to use certain language and talk to their friends and family in a certain way. And everybody can do something.
Absolutely. And everybody has connections. You might not think you do, but you do. Like you have interpersonal connections and you have social connections. And most people are in the workplace. My gosh, there's all kinds of things that can happen at the work site. And people go to the doctor. My heavens, a doctor can be such a tremendous ally if engaged, if properly engaged. So yeah, I just feel like if you're alive, you can be an ally. You have to kind of be open to it, and you have to be open to learning and thinking about what it is you can do.
Exactly. And I think, like you said, being open to learning, not only asking people about their experience, but taking the initiative yourself to do the research, watch documentaries, read books, go on the internet, because this conversation comes up with a lot of different groups. Like, it's not on us to educate you. People should be willing to go out and find that information on their own. And again, not make the recovery community take the brunt of that burden to educate everybody else.
I agree. And I think, some of the challenges there are, first of all, so I experience this myself, that the field is constantly changing. And so what I learned 10 years ago, if I had sort of stopped learning, would be old. It would be stale information. It would be, some of it even inaccurate. And so part of the challenge is that, we need to have like an ongoing curiosity about recovery if we're allies, to know that the field changes and to be really, really open to hearing things we might not want to hear. We might have our own biases. Everybody has their own biases. What are our biases? Then to be willing to listen and do some self-exploration in order to make sure that, okay, I understand that. Here's what I think about it. And then, I think also because the language is changing all the time, people do get pretty frustrated with that. And allies, I notice sometimes they're afraid to say something because they don't know if it's going to be the right language or not. And so, for all of us, just finding a way to be, to forgive ourselves if we make a mistake, and but forge ahead. And I think you're right that there are lots of different ways to learn. So like you said, there's videos, there's websites, there's conversations, there's books. However it is that you learn best, to do that, but then don't stop doing that because things are changing so fast.
Or even attending local meetings. Most meetings, 12-step meetings, young people in recovery meetings, accept allies and are happy to help you with those resources. And then that's a good place to go hear personal stories and get that aspect of it as well.
I think that's a really good point. So, and I learned, I went to a couple of all recovery meetings. I went to a couple of family support group meetings that were incredibly engaging for me as a family member, and some 12-step meetings, and I was invited to them. So there's, that was because it feels a little strange to just kind of walk in like, okay, what am I doing here? But to be invited and to go with someone. Or to ask, right? To ask, could I go with you to a meeting? Is something that allies can definitely do it's a show of solidarity, but it also, you learn as soon as you walk in that door, you learn. Yeah.
And I feel like that's something not a lot of people think about because it could feel a little intrusive. It feels like that space isn't for you, but most of those spaces are happy to have those people. Our all recovery meetings here at YPR, we specifically say all allies are welcome, whether they're just community advocates or they do have personal experience with a family member or a friend or any other loved one who has gone through substance use disorder. We accept everybody, and most meetings do. And I think we need to raise awareness so people know that that's another resource that they can use.
And I think, something else that allies can do. So now that you just told me that, I need to tell other people that. I knew that, but I haven't been thinking about it. And so, okay, you reminded me. So I need to tell other people that because, we have our own sphere of influence as allies, and we need to use that so that we tell people that we work with, or we tell people that, I don't know, play tennis with, whatever, whatever the engagement that we have with people socially is. We tell them, hey, did you know that you can do this? It's kind of cool. I did it one time. I really liked it. Would you like to come with me? We can do it together. So that is something that allies can do to continue to engage people beyond family members, right? I'm all about allies beyond family members because I feel like for the recovery community to be engaged in the overall community has to be more than family members, has to be employers, has to be landlords, has to be people on city council, as you mentioned, that are talking about recovery and that understand it and are engaged.
And I feel like that really feeds into recovery capital and recovery friendly communities, which you mention a lot throughout your book. But real quick, for people who may not know, could you define recovery capital for us?
I sure can. And this is definitely something that, allies need to be educated about. It's part of that education process. So allies don't always understand what a person needs to get well. And recovery capital is a good way to explain, here are all the things that help a person get well. And so there's personal recovery capital, which is the things that the individual has, could be a job, could be health insurance, could be self-esteem, could be good problem-solving skills, basic needs, housing, clothing, food. So that's the personal recovery capital. And oftentimes that's what we think about for early recovery, the first year or two of recovery. Like we got to get that, nailed down, but there's more. And so then there's social recovery capital, which are our relationships. And so family and friends, you name it, whatever the social networks are, that's the social recovery capital. And a lot of times that's people may think of that as limited to the recovery community, but it's not. It's the entire community, all of those relationships in the entire community. And then the community recovery capital are the resources that are available in the community. So treatment, harm reduction, collegiate recovery programs, attitudes are a big part of what's going on in the community. and then advocacy. So all of those things, as a person goes on their recovery journey at different times, they need different pieces of those types of recovery capital. And as allies, that's where we do our best work. We can if I'm a banker, what do I know? Oh, people need to have financial management skills. Oh, okay. I know how to, bundle debt and do, financial management trainings and so forth. I can do that. But people need to know. We need to tell them.
Mm-hmm. I think recovery capital is great as a concept because it used to be that the measurement of recovery was how many days have you been sober?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that it has shifted, especially in recent years. Different people still have different ideas of recovery, but I do think in general, most people look at it as being more than that. We're looking at the whole person because a lot of places, a lot of organizations like YPR accept that harm reduction is a form of recovery, moderation's a form of recovery. So those people don't fit into that how many days sober are you? So when we look at, okay, are you feeling fulfilled in your career? Do you have good relationships built up with your family? Do you feel connected to your culture? What is your general wellness? And has your life improved since you were in active youth? That feels like a much more useful tool than how many days sober are you?
Amen. Totally agree. And part of the challenge is, I think, when we are in our recovery community, it's kind of like a cocoon where, we surround ourselves with people who are like-minded, who have those same attitudes, and we forget that outside of that, there still is a belief that recovery is abstinence, and that's all, right? That's all. And a family member of mine one time asked me, well, when do we have to stop worrying about a relapse? I'm like, what? It's like, I'm not really sure. Let's talk about that, right? We need to think about it differently than just the number of days out or number of years sober, and how that somehow equates with less risk of starting to drink again. It just didn't make any sense. So I think that that knowledge is not broad in the wider community, and it's really important to get it out there. And I just have to, I had this experience with these young people in recovery. You guys, you young people, you are so much more willing to talk about yourselves and talk about your experiences and analyze them. Am I a moderate drinker? Am I in trouble with my drinking now? Or is this harm reduction? You're really engaged in thinking about it and talking about it. And that taught me an awful lot. It really taught me a lot. And for that reason, as YPR and other organizations that engage young people gain steam, that changes, it totally changes the recovery landscape. And it makes so many opportunities available for so many people who may not want that traditional path. Mm-hmm. And also for older people in recovery, it opens their eyes also to what their lives can be like. So I just can't say enough good things about YPR because you do such great things. And as you were saying, all multiple pathways, I think, is a little bit of a worn out phrase, but it's an important one. Mm-hmm. That there are just a whole lot of ways to get well and a whole lot of ways to stay well.
And I do think that the fact that the community is embracing multiple pathways more has led to more people sharing their stories. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like it used to be that when you recognize that you have an issue with substance use, you go to AA, you go to NA, anonymous is in the name. So then that's your community and you don't talk about it. Nobody wants to hear about it. But now that AA is still a very common path, but more people are looking at faith-based recovery, smart recovery. They go to yoga, they use YPR, they go to the Phoenix events and activities, places where they're encouraged to share and do recovery their way.
Mm-hmm. And what I notice also, so all of those things that you just said, any one person could do all of them. Mm-hmm. That it hardly even seems like a path, but it's so wide that there are so many things that are involved. And so it's not just 12-step. It's not just, there used to be this dichotomy between 12-step and medication. Of course, that doesn't make any sense.
Mhm.
And, you have all of these other ways of getting well and staying well and doing them all, doing every single one if you want to.
Mm-hmm. So that awareness of the multiple pathways of what substance use and addiction is, that all goes into the community aspect and creating those recovery-friendly communities that are there to actively support people who are in recovery, seeking recovery. How do they do that? What is a recovery-friendly community, and how do they support the people who are in recovery?
So we've been talking about people, so people, allies, people, and what they can do in their personal attitudes and how they can expand their own circle, expand and educate in their own circle. There's also places, and so thinking about places that perhaps at one time were not welcoming. I'm thinking sometimes of churches where people didn't feel welcome, faith-based, but now that's changing. And so a recovery-friendly community will have places that are welcoming, not just silent about it, but actively welcoming to individuals in recovery. And similarly with work sites. And so the worksite is just such an important place for education to take place. For example, educating supervisors about recovery and about some of the things that that a supervisor can do. Doesn't even have to be explicit, but be creating a safe space in the worksite. So there's people, there's places. And then there's policies. And so that tends to actually be the harder one because it's harder to change and definitely takes a longer period of time. And so policies that support, for example, recovery residences, that's changing, but there are definitely still some issues around where they can be located and planning boards that don't want them in their towns and so forth. So that's a policy issue. And there are many, many others. And so how I think about recovery-friendly communities, people, places, and policies that support recovery. And then all of those things that we just talked about, all of that recovery capital, that's what those people, places, and policies are going to build. So it's pretty, sometimes it gets really big to think about policy change and changing our community. But if you go back to recovery capital every single time, you can always find something in your community that needs to change and you can focus on it.
Mm-hmm. When I think about what you just said, people, places, policies, I think about the connections between the things, because the people are the ones who hold the stigma, which influence the policies. With your example with recovery residences or things like needle exchanges, if those are highly stigmatized, those policies aren't going to change. But on the other side, the people who support the people who support recovery and want their community to also support individuals in recovery, they can also be loud, just as loud as the dissenters, to help influence those policies to go in a positive direction.
Right. And so, when a community comes together, they're educated about addiction and recovery, and they come together, they can be really loud. They know the people they need to talk to at the community level. And you get your allies lined up with your people in recovery. It's a pretty powerful force.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. And the other thing that I always think about is, okay, there's a lot to be done, a lot of work to be done in the advocacy space. If it doesn't work out today, do it tomorrow. So, it's just a long policy change is a long, long, long road. And in the recovery community with young people in recovery, you have people coming in and out, not so much coming in and out of recovery, but coming in and out of engagement with advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they come in, they do a lot, they're on fire, and then they get a job and they move on. And that's good. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
But just that there's this ongoing work of training advocates. You just can't stop doing that, and educating people in the community. You can't stop it because you've got that long road of advocacy to walk together.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to recognize that they do have that power, because I think a big problem with people who are in recovery and their allies, or just anybody, is that they don't realize that they have the power to impact change in their communities.
Mm-hmm.
So helping to just going to town hall meetings, for example, you can go tell your story. In your book, multiple times, you said, research has shown that the most effective duo is stats and a story. And that is how you affect change.
Yeah, and that over and over and over again. Absolutely. And, I want to tell you a little story about that. So the way that I came to identify myself as an ally years and years ago. So with these young people in recovery, we were going around the state of Maine and we were doing just that. We were going to town meetings. They were telling their stories. And then either I would present some data or somebody else would, but, sort of coupled with information and coupled with resources. So we were educating and making sure people knew where they could go for help, but mostly they were like inspired by the stories that they were hearing. And, there's that way of telling your recovery stories. Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And for me, that means, okay, so that's how things would start. And then I would say, and my name is Alison Webb. And there was like this long pause because I really didn't have very much to say after that.
Mm-hmm.
And, the young people, like we talked about it together and they said, oh, Alison, you're an ally. You're an ally. Say that. And so what I found also, so that was helpful for me, but then when I've said it, it's also helped other people because, when you're a family member, I think sometimes it's more obvious. But if you're just somebody who's like, I really care about this, this is really something I care about in my community, but I don't have a direct connection to it, you're an ally.
Mm-hmm.
And so it helps people to have an identity that way.
It is. And allyship is an important identity because it takes everybody to affect this kind of change. It takes the people who have the lived experience, who have been through addiction, but also it takes the experiences of family members because that also increases the likelihood that someone's going to relate to one of those two things. And that's going to be the most effective way to tell those stories.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah. It's like we need it all. We need everyone. We need all of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So recovery allies are there to support, and they can do that not by putting themselves at the center, but by amplifying other people's voices, by adding their own story into the mix and showing just how big the problem is with the opioid crisis or the addiction crisis in general, and showing that it really does affect entire communities, entire families, etc.
Absolutely. And I think, as allies, again, outside of the family community of allies, allies who are, for example, working in, they're social workers, they're working in the criminal justice system, they're working in child protective services, they have so many stories to tell, and they have so many ways of having an impact. And they need to know that they're allies, right? So, so they kind of amplify that whole, how are we building recovery capital? They can amplify that.
So while we're on the topic of allies telling stories, what tips do you have for an ally who wants to start going to these types of meetings, these town halls, these city council meetings, and telling their stories? How would you suggest they do that?
What a great question. So every town is different, of course, every municipality, and there's a different flavor that the recovery community has in every town. And so one thing to start doing as an ally is just show up. So either show up for a rally, show up at a recovery center event, just kind of watch and listen, kind of see how things are going, and introduce yourself around. And so that you can, it's so easy to get connected in the recovery community. I just have to say, you just have to put your hand out and say, my name's Alison Webb, and there you are. You have this whole community around you. And there are so many nonprofits that are doing particular pieces of work in recovery. And I'm not talking about treatment. The treatment world is pretty separate, or at least I think of it as separate. I'm really talking about community-based organizations that do recovery, to kind of get connected there first, kind of learn what your story actually is. And then when there is that public opportunity, then you'll feel pretty confident about what it is that you have to say, but kind of get connected first, get connected with people in recovery, and go to meetings, like you said, go to meetings. So just kind of get integrated. And then I think you'll be surprised at the number of opportunities that you have to speak up.
That's great, because again, we've been talking about this entire episode, but making sure you, like you said, get integrated into the community, because allies are a part of the community. They're an important part of the community. They help affect change, and they do have lived experience. It's a different lived experience from the people who have been through active addiction, but that is still lived experience, very intimate, close experience with the addiction crisis.
And I think also someone I read someplace maybe, that an ally, like you can't call yourself an ally. You need to be brought into the community as an ally. And so allies are part of the recovery community, and they need to, like I said, integrate into it. Like you're not going to stand outside of the community and stand up and say, I'm an ally, and this is what those people over there should do. It's not like it's really very integrated. And then, you earn you earn your stripes as an ally by being part of the community, by learning and by engaging, like whatever it is in your community that's happening. So, some places it's harm reduction. Harm reduction is what it's all about in some communities. Other communities, not so much. And so, it just varies from one community to the next.
And again, this goes back to what we said earlier, where you ask the community, you listen, and then you act on it. But you can't ask if you're not a part of it.
Yeah, you can't ask if you don't show up.
And of course, if you want to help a family member particularly, that's easy. You can ask them what they need. If they need childcare while they go to appointments, or if they need transportation, they need help gathering documents to get a driver's license, you can help them with those things. But their experience and their needs do not reflect everybody's experience and needs. So if you want to help the community as a whole, you have to go find out different stories, different experiences, listen, and act.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think sometimes for many of us, the listening is the hard part, because we already want to jump to the answer. And so just really being, take your time, ask a question, listen, and then be a little self-reflective about, okay, how is it that I want to get involved?
Yeah, I think it's human nature to already think we know the answer to the question we ask.
Exactly.
We do that all the time. So the listening is the hard part. But you as an ally do not know the exact experience of everybody in the recovery community. So actually listening and being prepared to hear answers you don't want to hear is a very important part of the journey.
It's so rewarding, though, because when you do hear something that you either don't expect or don't want to hear, and you're really, you're serious about being an ally, it's just endlessly interesting, because then you have to think about it. You have like, how did that work? I didn't think I was going to hear that, and reflect on it and do your own work. Yeah.
So as we start to close out this episode, I've got one last question for you. It's kind of a big one, but if you had one piece of advice for someone who is looking to jump into allyship, something that we haven't already talked about, so now listening and asking, what would you tell that person to do?
Finding where people in recovery in your community are, like where are they? So some communities have recovery community centers. Some communities have AA meetings or 12-step meetings. Some communities have different types of peer run organizations. I suppose if you didn't have somebody that you could just reach out to and ask, because that would be my best answer. But the second best answer would be to seek out those organizations and go there, and see what they do, find out what they do. And, you'll know your own skills. Like I happen to be pretty good at nonprofit organization. Like you'll know what you're good at. Some people might be good fundraisers. Some people might be good event organizers. Whatever it is that you're good at, you'll know that part of your story. And then when you show up at that recovery organization, you might have some ideas about what you can offer.
Mm-hmm. And even like those are some very big skills you just listed. I think some of the smaller ones count too. If you're good at baking, you can have a bake sale and contribute in that way.
There you go. Absolutely. And if you're just good at, shooting the breeze, which some people are and some people aren't, you can be a great conversationalist at that recovery center. Just hang out.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Even
some
the
value.
little skills.
That's right. That's right.
But the main takeaway there is that everybody has something to offer and nobody's helpless.
Mm-hmm. Nobody's helpless. And, where you, as an ally, where you have an interest, you will find in the recovery community a place to engage that interest. You'll find a place.
All right. I think that's a great place to leave off. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about recovery allies and what people can do. I think it's been a great conversation. I learned a lot and I already read the book.
Well, it's my pleasure. And again, I just can't say enough good things about YPR. You guys launched me 10 years ago as an ally, and I have a lot of gratitude for that.
All right. Thank you, Allison. And thank you, listeners, for coming on this journey with us. I hope you found something useful too. Make sure you like, subscribe, do whatever on any platform you're listening on. And we will see you next week on Recovery Corner.